the Blood Countess. That's what they used to call Elizabeth Bathory. She was a Hungarian noblewoman whose infamous reputation has become somewhat legendary. Born in 1560, it is alleged that she had tortured and murdered dozens, if not hundreds, of young girls in a pursuit of eternal youth. The gruesome rumors surrounding her alleged vampiric tendencies and sadistic rituals were fueled by her wealth, power, and the eerie isolation of her castle. But despite her aristocratic status, the dark legacy that she built led to her arrest in 1610, though her exact crime still remains shrouded in mystery. Was she really a cold-blooded killer? Or was she, as some claim, simply the victim of a political conspiracy? Whichever way you think, it's a story of a chilling blend of myth and reality. It's got everything: madness, power, tragedy, all wrapped into one. But we're not interested in stories, we're interested in the truth. So we're going to try to get to the bottom of it, albeit engaging in a little bit of introspection for a bit of fun. So let me first welcome you to the channel. Here we are today, finally doing a video on Elizabeth Bathory. A few of you have suggested it, so here I am, hopefully right on schedule. As always, if you like this kind of content and want to hear about more psychos and all the rest through history, well, check out the playlists and subscribe for more. And tell me who you want to see next in the comments. But with all of that out of the way, let's get busy. So, as I have said, we start our story in 1560, where Elizabeth Bathory was born at her family estate in near Báthory, Royal Hungary, and she spent much of her early years at Exed Castle, that is still located within the family's ancestral lands. You must remember that the Bathory family was, well, let's just say they were quite well-to-do, old money from the old world. In fact, her father, Baron George VI Bathory, belonged to the Exed branch of the Bathory family, and that was a very prominent aristocratic lineage in Hungary. Baron George's brother, Andrew Bonaventura Bathory, had previously held the title of Voivode of Transylvania until his death in 1566. Now, just quickly, Voivode is kind of the... In Hungarian we say ban. That is the term for local ruler, or kind of like a king. In Romanian we say voivode. Think of Vlad Dracula, Vlad Tepes II. He was the voivode of Transylvania in a different time. So, Elizabeth's paternal heritage was of course notable too, and traced back to plenty of powerful figures, including her great-grandmother, Anna Radziwill, who was a member of the influential Polish-Lithuanian House of Radziwill, and her great-grandfather, Conrad the Red, Duke of Masovia and Warsaw, from the ancient Piast dynasty. On her mother's side, Elizabeth's lineage was equally distinguished. Baroness Anna Bathory of Somlyo, Elizabeth's mother, was the daughter of Stefan Bathory. I've mentioned him in a few other videos. He was the Palatine of Hungary and belonged to another branch of the Bathory family. Now, as for her maternal uncle, Stefan Bathory, 1533–86, was an important historical figure who became the Prince of Transylvania and later the King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania. And that's a significant place in European politics, to say the least. Elizabeth also had an older brother called Stefan Bathory, who lived 1555–1605, who held the esteemed position of Royal Judge of Hungary, alongside several other siblings. So as you can see, This isn't just some random rise to power. This is a legacy that is set into the fabric of the Hungarian royalty and well, just the East European structure of the royal families and old aristocratic lineages, which is why the entire controversy around Elizabeth was such a huge one. An embarrassment, the black sheep, as we could say. Well, let's continue on. Of course, as a child of nobility, Elizabeth was born into a world of wealth and very high social standing. Anything she had have wanted, she could have easily have gotten. She was raised as a Calvinist Protestant, a faith that deeply influenced her upbringing, and during her youth she received an education befitting her status. So, for example, we think of, the main languages. We had German, of course, and Hungarian, which, of course, mother tongues, and, of course, very important neighboring countries. We're talking Holy Roman Empire, this sort of thing. But also Greek and Latin, part of that old classical education. These linguistic skills were part of this rigorous education that was provided by her family, ensuring that she was well versed in classical studies and able to engage with the intellectual traditions and trends of the time. But while Elizabeth enjoyed the advantages of a privileged life, some sources suggest her family may have imparted lessons in cruelty, which later became associated with her notorious reputation. This notion of being taught cruelty remains a topic of debate, of course, as it may offer a little bit of insight into the behavior that earned her the infamous moniker of the Blood Countess. Well, either way, it wasn't easy growing up. Money can't buy everything, and it can't fix all of your problems. And one of the problems that Elizabeth had was epilepsy. Frequent seizures. Now, at the time, it wasn't known as epilepsy. We didn't quite understand the science behind it. It was actually just known in a very literal sense as falling sickness. I'm sure it's very, very horrifying for anybody to witness or anybody to go through. It still is to this day. During these episodes, treatments were, of course, primitive, with one method involving rubbing a non-sufferer's blood on the sufferer's lips, or giving them a mixture of blood and a piece of a skull after the fit had subsided. Very much still in argument over those methods, working or not. These archaic remedies show the limited medical understanding of the condition during the 16th century, everyone trying to do what they can with what they had, with always, well, differing results. The nature of Bathory's affliction, coupled with her later reputation for cruelty, has actually fueled a few speculations about her mental state, and this mental state offers a potential link between her medical condition and subsequent behavior. One of the most persistent rumors surrounding Bathory's youth involves a reported pregnancy at the age of 13. This is, of course, prior to her first marriage. Now, according to this story, she gave birth to a child fathered by a peasant boy, a rumor that emerged much later through gossip and local folklore. You could, of course, see how this was a big problem and an embarrassment. Well, the child was supposedly sent away to Wallachia, that is in Romania, actually Vlad the Impaler's hometown, that sort of thing, with a local woman entrusted to care for it. In return for her services, the woman was said to have been compensated quite kindly. But it has to be said, while this story is often told, the actual evidence surrounding the alleged pregnancy is highly contested, as the claim surfaced only after Elizabeth's death, and the remains unverified by any concrete historical documents. But that being said, they would of course not write such an embarrassment down. As such, it remains a subject of debate. I guess it's more of an aspect of folklore towards her life and a bit of romanticism. And we may say there's also politically motivated, as to add a little bit of fuel to the fire as to this person is bad. Well, I suppose perhaps we'll never know, unless we can find the remains of the one in question and do some sort of DNA matching, but no, good luck with that. Well, let's move on now to 1573, and this was when Bathory became engaged to Count Ferenc Nádasdy, a prominent member of the aristocratic Nádasdy family. The engagement was not one of romantic affection, but rather a political alliance. I don't feel too bad. It was pretty typical for marriages at the time. Nádasdy's parents, Baron Tamás Nádasdy and Orsolia Kanizai, were influential figures in Hungarian nobility with strong ties to the elite. The marriage between Elizabeth and Ferenc, which took place on May the 8th, 1575, in the palace of Varano, which is in modern-day Slovakia, cemented their joint ownership of significant territories in the Kingdom of Hungary and Transylvania, further increasing their power, and with power comes wealth. It was good for both sides, enhancing both family holdings and political influence. A win-win. Bathory's wedding gift from her husband was the castle of Countess, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, located in the Little Carpathians near Trenčín, modern-day Nové Mesto. At the time of their marriage, the castle was owned by King Maximilian II, but in 1569 Nádasdy's mother was appointed an official steward. In 1602, Nádasdy purchased the castle from the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II, and Bathory took responsibility for managing the estate and overseeing its operations, including Countess country house and 17 nearby villages, especially while Nádasdy was away on military campaigns. Following their wedding, the couple resided at Nádasdy's family castle in Sarvar. However, in 1578, Nádasdy was called to lead Hungarian forces against the Ottomans, marking the beginning of his military involvement in the region. While he was away fighting in the so-called Long War, which lasted from 1593 to 1606, Bathory assumed full control of the family estates and managed the business operations. Her role during this time expanded beyond estate management, as she was also tasked with providing medical care to the Hungarian and Slovak people affected by the war, and there were plenty of them. You see, at this time the Ottomans were really trying to push north. They had been ever since they took Constantinople. Well, given that the village of Countess had already been ravaged by the Ottomans, and Sarvar was located on the border between Royal Hungary and Ottoman-occupied Hungary, Bathory faced constant threats of attack, making her role in defending her husband's estates especially crucial. 1585. Anna Nádasdy was born, the daughter of Elizabeth Bathory, who would later marry Nicola VI Zrinski, becoming one of the most prominent families in the region. Anna's marriage to him linked her to the influential Croatian noble family, furthering her status within the Hungarian circles too. Elizabeth's other children included Orsolia, also known as Orska, born in 1590, whose future marriage to István II Benyo would tie her to other notable Hungarian families. You see, the Benyos, a family with long-standing ties to Hungarian nobility, were also quite on the level with the Báthorys too. Katalin, also referred to as Katharina Nádasdy, born in 1594, also grew up within the same elite framework. Unfortunately, we don't know much about the exact fates of Orsolia and Katalin, as their lives after marriage they're just not well documented. But it is likely that they maintained their family's standing in the Hungarian aristocracy. Another of Bathory's children, Andras Nádasdy, was born in 1596, but tragically didn't make it very far. He died in 1603, before he could establish his place in the legacy. Paul Nádasdy, born in 1598, survived into adulthood and played a significant role in Hungarian history himself, but that's a topic for another video. He would father Franz III Nádasdy, who was involved in the magnate plot against the Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I, so that's something. The Nádasdy family's involvement in political intrigue and the tensions with the emperor shows the high stakes of noble life during this period. In fact, some chronicles even mention a son named Miklos Nádasdy, who allegedly married another Susanna Zrinski. However, Miklos' name is conspicuously absent from Bathory's will of 1610, and that raises a few questions about his legitimacy, or perhaps the possibility that he either died young or was raised as a cousin rather than one of Elizabeth's legitimate children. Oh, and also, there's a few rumors surrounding the life of another child, a deceased Nádasdy infant named Georgi, though details of his life and death are also unverified. Such is the nature of rumors. All of Elizabeth's children, just like their mother, were raised under the supervision of a governess, ensuring they received education and training that was expected of noble children. Now, here's where things get a little bit sad. Tragedy struck Elizabeth when her husband, Ferenc Nádasdy, passed away on the 4th of January 1604 at the age of 48. Now, Elizabeth did not take this well. It was a significant blow to her, as they'd been married for 29 years, and had weathered numerous challenges together. Despite the fact that the marriage was political, they had grown quite close. Ferenc's health had been declining for several years, with the illness reportedly beginning around 1601. He was first afflicted with severe leg pain, which ultimately left him permanently disabled by 1603. Despite efforts to treat the ailment, his condition only worsened, and eventually it took his life. Ferenc's passing left Elizabeth to manage the family estates and the legacy of the Nádasdy name alone, and that is a lot of pressure. But before his death, Ferenc had entrusted his widow and their children to the care of Georgi Thurzo, a figure that will, well, come up later on. He kind of played a pretty big role in investigating the alleged crimes. But we'll get to them soon, because the rumors of Elizabeth's involvement in horrific acts were already circulating in Hungary, beyond by the early 1600s, Hungary and beyond rather, Between 1602 and 04, the Lutheran minister István Magyari took the step of lodging formal complaints against Elizabeth, raising suspicions about her behavior and actions at the Vienna court. Just quickly, this name Magyari. Magyar is actually the word for Hungary, and I believe they call their language Magyar as well. So if you hear this word, you know that it relates to Hungary or something Hungarian. Well, these complaints, fueled by rumors that had been whispered throughout the region, of course, caught the attention of authorities. They were hard to ignore after a while. In 1610, Emperor Matthias II assigned Georgi Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary, to lead a formal investigation into the allegations. Thurzo, a respected nobleman, directed two notaries, Moses Ziraki and Andras Keretsuri, to gather the evidence. Their work involved interviewing witnesses, and by October 1610, they had collected 52 statements from individuals who, claimed that they had first-hand knowledge of the events. As the investigation continued, the number of testimonies grew and grew, and by 1611, over 300 witnesses had come forward, providing a grim picture of what had occurred at Bathory's estates. You see, this growing body of evidence eventually led to the infamous trials and posthumous tarnishing of the Bathory name. For years, it was believed that Elizabeth Bathory had been torturing and killing peasants, with very little regard to the consequences. The disappearances of these lower-class individuals, especially young girls, failed to raise suspicions among the authorities, at least for a while, likely due to their low social standing and the relative isolation of the estates where these acts took place. However, as time passed, Bathory's killings escalated to include daughters of the lower gentry, young women from respectable families who were sent to her in hopes of gaining favor, learning from her, and perhaps even advancing their own social standings with their association with powerful Countess. The inclusion of these girls in her grisly acts was the real turning point, as the deaths of those from higher social classes, of course, were bound to attract a little bit more attention. It's not right, but it is the way it is. Witnesses at her trial later spoke of various methods that Bathory allegedly employed. Some survivors recalled seeing signs of extreme physical abuse on the bodies of those deceased, with some corpses buried in traditional cemeteries and others disposed of in unmarked graves, adding to this mystery and horror surrounding her actions. One detail that did emerge during the investigation was the alleged use of needles, which were reportedly employed in the torment of her victims. The exact nature of Bathory's methods of cruelty is, of course, a matter of historical debate, but these accounts, fueled by testimonies of numerous witnesses, certainly do not make her look very good. But, innocent until proven guilty, still, we talk about the accusations. Among the testimonies were those from witnesses who claimed to have witnessed the deaths of family members within the confines of Bathory's private quarters, the gymnasium. This area, meant for the ladies of the household, became a scene of unspeakable horror, where those who were trusted into Bathory's care often met tragic and violent ends. The secrecy surrounding the deaths and the suspicion that they were a result of torture and brutal torture of that led to a growing sense of unease among the locals. As rumors of Bathory's crimes spread, the situation reached a boiling point. On the 13th of December, 1612, a formal agreement was made between Georgy Thurzo and Nicola VI Zrinski regarding the division of Bathory's estate and her eventual imprisonment. Thurzo, who had been tasked with investigating the allegations, arrived at Kastitsa Castle on New Year's Eve, 1612, along with a small group of soldiers. It was here that he arrested Bathory and 4 of her servants, including Dorotia Semtets, Ilona Yo, Katarina Benica, and Janos Ujvali, known by the nicknames Ibis or Flicko. These 4 were suspected of assisting her in the murders, or perhaps getting rid of the evidence. Thurzo's letter to his wife, describing the scene, mentioned that he had discovered a deceased girl and another living prey girl in the castle during his surprise visit. However, once again, it's unclear whether these statements were corroborated or exaggerated, and there's no concrete evidence to confirm them. Although some accounts suggest that Bathory was found in a state of shock or under duress, the widely accepted story of her being found covered in blood seems to be a little bit fabricated. This sensationalized element likely emerged as part of this larger myth surrounding her, but despite the dramatic claims, it appears that Bathory was arrested without any immediate spectacle. She went away pretty quietly and was not discovered mid-act, as some stories might have suggested. Certainly makes for a better story, though, don't you think? Thurzo's actions were reportedly more calculated as he made his move swiftly and professionally, taking Bathory into custody before any further victims could be identified. Following her arrest, Thurzo convened with key family members to discuss how to proceed. Of course, this wasn't just a common criminal, a member of the nobility. Perhaps a more gentle and private approach would be needed. And think about Thurzo. He doesn't want to raise any eyebrows. Put it this way, it's a very powerful family, and the family name is important. He didn't want to lose his own head by dragging the rest of them down with Elizabeth, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as it seems. Have to step carefully. No pressure, Thurzo. Well, among those involved in all these discussions was actually Bathory's son, Paul Nádasdy, along with two of her sons-in-law, Georgi Drugev and Nikola Zrinsky. The public scandal surrounding the crimes put her family's property and wealth at risk, of course, particularly in light of political ramifications of her actions. Her family, particularly those in Transylvania, feared the loss of control over her extensive estates and the potential seizure of her wealth by the crown. So, to prevent this, Thurzo, Paul, and the two other sons-in-law decided on a course of action that would keep Bathory under strict house arrest, rather than sending her to a nunnery, as was initially planned. Now, this decision, likely motivated by both legal and political concerns, seemed to ensure that Bathory remained confined to her castle, rather than facing trial or execution, as some might have expected. Either way, executing a noblewoman is never really an easy affair. Of course, everything is complex, all the loyalties, all the power plays, and this deeply ingrained secrecy surrounding the actual accusations. All of this helped shape the outcome of her arrest, the how and the why and the when, ensuring that she was not immediately subjected to the full legal consequences of her alleged crimes. But really, if there was any doubt of the veracity to the weight of these accusations, they would not have arrested her for it. That's what I think, anyway. Of course, instead, she spent the rest of her days in captivity. For me, locked up in a little room, or the quick fate of a beheading. Well, you have to weigh up your options, don't you? Of course, her family also worked to protect their interests in the aftermath of the scandal. Now, there were 4 servants who were implicated in Bathory's crimes, and they were also among the 17 witnesses who testified during the first trial. Before the proceedings officially commenced, these suspects had been subjected to torture, a common practice at the time to extract confessions from those accused of serious offences. Under duress, they acknowledged their involvement in the gruesome acts, claiming that they were merely following the orders of their mistress. The admission of guilt, of course, sealed their fates, and they were sentenced to death as accomplices. Of course, the executions of the 4 servants, well, they were a lot less secretive than how they dealt with Bathory herself. They were as brutal as they were public. Dorothea and Ilona were burned alive, but not before experiencing a gruesome fate. Both women had their fingers severed with a pair of blazing pincers, a final act of torture meant to inflict maximum pain before their execution. Janos Ujvari, one of the younger servants, was given a less painful execution by beheading. Still not good, but hey, I'd take the beheading over the finger thing any day. A somewhat more merciful punishment, of course, due to his youth and the belief that his involvement in the crimes was somewhat less severe than others. But his remains were, however, not spared. After the execution, his body was burned alongside the bodies of Jo and Sentes on the same pyre, a gruesome spectacle meant to symbolize the eradication of Bathory's supporters. Erzi Majerova, Another one of Bathory's servants managed to elude capture for some time, but was eventually caught and burned alive after being unable to escape further. The brutality of the trials and executions, of course, left a lasting impression on the local population, reinforcing the severity of the charges against Bathory and her accomplices. As for Katerina Bennica, one of the other accused servants, the evidence of her involvement in the abuses was sufficient to sentence her to life imprisonment. Unlike her fellow servants, she was spared the immediate brutality of execution. But think about it. We're talking about a long, long time ago, and a Hungarian dungeon is not generally rated very well. It was no less severe in its own way. The remainder of her life in confinement. Now that to me is worse than death, during this time or the previous time. Rumors and hearsay played a significant role in the escalation of the charges against Bathory, of course, and many of the claims surrounding her atrocities are based on speculation rather than concrete evidence. While it is known that she was arrested and put on trial, there is no official documentation to support the claim that she was ever formally subject to the widespread local complaints before the arrest. It was customary for complaints to be written and presented to the authorities, even in cases as minor as theft of a little animal, a chicken, or whatever it was. But no such formal accusations seem to have been made against Bathory herself before the rumors began to spread. The rumors, however, were enough to provoke investigation, which culminated in the two trials. Now, the first was held on January the 2nd, 1611, and the second trial shortly after on January the 7th. These hearings were a key part of the legal proceedings against Bathory and her associates, with the trial serving as a means to both confirm the allegation and to seek justice for the victims. Many of the witnesses were former servants or individuals who allegedly witnessed the abuse. One particularly significant testimony came from a servant named Susanna, who claimed that Bathory's court official, Jakub Silvasi, had seen the figure of a victim recorded in one of Bathory's private books. This revelation led to the claim that the highest number of Bathory's victims reached a staggering 650, a figure that would become one of the most widely cited in the law surrounding her crimes. Frankly, it's a little bit ridiculous. But hey, it is what it is. However, Silvasi's testimony did not corroborate the existence of such a book. Of course, he said it, and everyone said, well, where is this book? I don't know. It's somewhere. Somewhere in the pile. The existence of the book, of course, well, it's a mystery. The number 650, therefore, seems to have been completely based on rumor and sensationalism. Now, on January 25th, 1611, the Palatine of Hungary, Georgi Thurzo, had actually wrote to King Matthias II informing him that Elizabeth Bathory had been taken prisoner and confined to her castle. This event took place amid the ongoing political turmoil, which included conflicts with the Prince of Transylvania, and it was clear that the palace, which represented Habsburg authority in Hungary, had vested interest in both the investigation and the eventual outcome. While the charges against Bathory dominated the local attention, the political landscape at the time also played a significant role in shaping the investigation and its proceedings. And so Bathory was imprisoned, locked up in the castle Kastitsa, where she would spend the remaining years of her life until her death at the age of 54. But the exact nature of her confinement, well, what was that like? Once again, disputed. Was it a tiny little dungeon, miserable, cold, leaking walls, and cockroaches and rats running all over the place? Or did they give her a decent room? After all, she is a noble. A psychopathic murdering noble, but a noble nonetheless. According to Thurzo, at least, she was held in a bricked room within the castle, effectively sealing her away from the outside world. However, other sources, including written records from a visit by priests in July of 1614, suggest that Bathory's imprisonment was actually more akin to house arrest, where she was still able to move around the castle with a certain degree of freedom. Of course, it's a bit of a discrepancy, isn't it? Once again, it might be a bit of a blending of fact and myth. But then again, think about it. Thurzo might have been putting forward these circumstances to somewhat appease the mob. You think about it. Everyone's already living in terrible conditions. Medieval housing. It's not known for its comforts. Now, to be locked up in Castle Kastitsa, safe, a nice little fire, warm, probably even a good collection of books. To most of the public, that doesn't sound like much of a punishment. I wouldn't mind it. But Thurzo probably didn't want to tell people that. It's far better for people to think that she's in quite a miserable little dungeon, getting the punishment that she deserves. But once again, we have the accounts from the priests who go against that narrative. And I don't think a priest would tell lies, don't you? So, in the last years of her life, Bathory's affairs were organized through a will that she wrote in September of 1610. This is just before her arrest. In this document, she bequeathed all of her assets, both current and future, to her children. The will was signed at the end of 1610, and the division of her estates and properties was set into motion. The act of bequeathing her will may have played a role in the intrigue surrounding her downfall, as her considerable fortune and large landholdings, which expanded over her husband's death, made her a powerful figure whose wealth could have posed a threat to rival factions. Now we sort of get to the end of the story. It is the evening of August the 20th, 1614, and Elizabeth Bathory cries out from her little cell, complaining to her bodyguard about feeling cold in her hands. He was apparently quite indifferent to it, telling her just to go and lie down, relax for a while, you'll be fine. Bathory then retired to her bed, and the following morning she was found unresponsive. Now just quickly, if this is true, it might add a little bit of credence to the argument that she was living in extremely comfortable circumstances. Now, Thurzo was saying that she was just bricked up in a tiny little room. You think someone like that for a couple of years would, well, a little bit of cold in the hands would be the least of their worries. But someone who's quite pampered, well, perhaps they would be complaining about such a thing. So it lends more credence, in my opinion, to the fact of her living in quite good circumstances, or at least the purported fact by the priest's testimonies. Either way, some sources suggest that her death was natural, though it is quite suspicious, don't you think? Cold hands, dead in the morning. Either way, she was buried in the church of Kastitsa on November 25th, 1614. But there are other accounts, and they claim that due to the anger of local villagers over the Countess being buried in their cemetery, her body was subsequently exhumed and moved to Exed, which was interred in the Bathory family crypt. The true location of the grave remains a mystery, and despite various attempts to locate it, there are no definitive markers at the church in Kastitsa or at the castle to confirm where she was finally laid to rest. Of course, once again, it just adds to the fun and mystery of the story. So, there are a number of historians who have suggested that Elizabeth Bathory was actually the victim of a conspiracy, one of them being Laszlo Nagy in particular, who argued that the charges against her were primarily politically motivated, driven in part by her immense wealth and growing influence following the death of her husband. The land she acquired over the year made her a powerful and wealthy widow, and it suggested that her growing influence might have actually been a threat to other factions in Hungary. The timing of her arrest and her trial also coincided with a period of religious and political upheaval in the region, including the ongoing wars with the Ottomans, the spread of Protestantism, and the Habsburgs' increasing control over Hungary. So within this context, there's plenty of people who believe that Bathory's downfall was just orchestrated, at least in part to weaken her politically, while also allowing her wealth to be redistributed. Furthermore, after her arrest, it's notable that Matthias II's substantial debt to Bathory was quite conveniently cancelled. Now that's interesting, isn't it? And of course adds a little bit of weight to that theory that the prosecution was motivated financially. Well, there is also the theory that the downfall was part of a Catholic/Habsburg plot against her, but it has been countered by several key arguments. You see, one of the strongest challenges comes from István Magyari, a Lutheran minister who filed complaints that eventually prompted the investigation into Bathory's crimes. Although the period was marked by significant religious tension, particularly between Catholics and Protestants, this does not necessarily support the notion that Bathory's prosecution was driven by an anti-Protestant sentiment. In fact, Bathory herself was actually raised as a Calvinist, not a Lutheran, which is an important thing to add, and that complicates the idea of direct conflict between her and the Catholic Habsburg authorities now, doesn't it? Therefore, this theory of her being targeted for religious reasons is, well, it's frankly less than compelling, and considering the broader political and personal motives behind her arrest, I think money and land and all the rest is probably more realistic. Well, there is further evidence that challenges the conspiracy theory, and it comes from the testimony of Georgi Thurzo. According to accounts, Thurzo entered the castle of Kastitsa and discovered numerous bodies, both dead and dying, which appeared to corroborate the charges against her. You can't have better evidence than that, right? However, some scholars have argued that Thurzo may have actually fabricated the findings in order to further his own political ambitions. According to this theory, the physical evidence of the murders and abuse was just exaggerated or even outright invented to ensure her conviction and remove her as a potential threat to his own status. Could be. The idea suggests that the political motives behind Bathory's arrest were a little bit more complex than a simple religious conspiracy. Well, it's also left quite a mark on folklore and literature, don't you think? Influencing the countless tales and stories over the centuries. That's where we get a lot of our, well, the more crazy stories about her. The most persistent thing to emerge from her case is this image of her bathing in the blood of her victims to preserve her youth. Frankly, it's a little bit ridiculous, but it's become quite iconic in fiction and popular culture. Exaggerated, distorted for dramatic attempts, Bathory is sometimes depicted as learning the secret of bathing in blood after slapping a servant in anger, causing the blood to spatter onto her skin and, well, after a little bit of inspections, thinking, hey, not bad, let's do a mask. The blood, it is claimed, would have had the effect of making her skin look younger and more beautiful than once it was removed. Well, the first written account of the Bathory case to prominently feature this blood-bathing myth was in Tragica Historia, penned by a Jesuit scholar, Laszlo Turoczi, in 1729. This work was considered one of the earliest sources to introduce the now famous legend of the Countess's blood rituals. Despite the lack of solid evidence supporting this detail, Matthias Bell, in his 1742 book, expressed skepticism about the authenticity about the blood-bathing story. Although he still played a role in spreading the legend, over time the narrative became deeply ingrained in public imagination, and later historians and novelists often reduced Bathory's crimes to simple vanity, claiming she was motivated by a desire to retain her youthful appearance. Of course, modern historians argued the idea of Elizabeth Bathory being driven by vanity, particularly the legend of the blood bathing in the blood of virgins to maintain her appearance, was rooted in contemporary gender role stereotypes. During the time of Bathory's trial and subsequent myth-building, it was difficult for society to imagine that women could commit violent acts for reasons beyond superficial desire. The notion that a woman might engage in sadistic acts of violence for its own sake, well, that was largely unthinkable. This is why the myth of Bathory's bloodbaths became intertwined with the idea of female vanity. However, by the early 19th century, the sadistic nature of her crimes began to emerge as a more plausible explanation. The witness accounts from the trial, which were first published in 1817, revealed the more sensational aspects of the bloodbaths, particularly those linked to vanity, were more myth than they were reality. Either way, despite the thorough debunking of these claims, the legend of Bathory continued to circulate, taking on a life of its own in popular culture. Some versions of her story were designed to simply entertain or thrill the audience, while others took a little bit more of a critical approach, using her as a symbol of female vanity in general. And as the legend grew, so did the embellishments, and some retellings introduced even more elaborate and fantastical elements that were not present at all in the historical record, not even hinted or alluded to. Of course, they included graphic depictions of torture chambers, such as the infamous Iron Maiden, a device that, while iconic in popular imagination, was not mentioned anywhere in connections with Bathory's crimes. And of course, blood coagulates in a certain way that would make it very difficult to take a bath in it. You must know that, right? Right. Well, what do you think about Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess? Well, for me, the answer's somewhere in the middle. We know that the whole bloodbath thing is, I guess, a myth. An interesting myth, but a myth nonetheless. But we also know that the weight of these accusations is quite heavy, 300 or so. But that figure of 650, cited in that journal that conveniently cannot be found, conveniently does not exist. Well, I think we can sweep that one under the rug, at least for now. Of course, we're trying to investigate a crime that happened 400 years ago, so we can't quite hold it to much modern standard. But as always, it's interesting. Anyway, I'm going to thank my top-tier supporters and patrons. That is on YouTube and Patreon. Doug, Kimberly, Christine, Sally, Ember, Susan, Cameron, Legitmus, Kerry, Charlene, Lynn Therese, Katiana, Nicholas, Ulfetnir, Alexander, Charles, Christine, Dr. Neuronerd. Thank you for your service, Doctor. Erin, Jaden, Jim, Jeffrey, Jessica, Madeline, Melissa, Orthodox Review, Scott, Stark Factory, Shell, Wendy, Josie, Sarah, Video Man, and Ryan. Hell yeah. Thank you, everybody, and I will see you in the next video. Perhaps something a little more palatable. Oh, come on. I know you like this stuff. Good night, and lots of love to you all. I'm going to take a bath.